Welcome to Personally I Think, the show where we look past mainstream talking points to share what we actually personally think about global geopolitics. In this explainer, we're going to talk about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, and the true, unfiltered reality of what is happening on the ground in Balochistan. We're going to cut right through the massive geopolitical hype and uncover the raw data of this massive infrastructure project, specifically focusing on the port city of Gwadar. Here's exactly how we'll break this down today. 1. The grand CPEC vision. 2. Gwadar's geographic significance. 3. The local ground reality. 4. Security threats and resistance. And 5. A future naval base.
Section 1. The grand CPEC vision, a $46 billion promise.
So when CPEC officially launched back in 2015, it was totally hyped up as the absolute jewel in the crown of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The geographic ambition here is honestly staggering. The grand plan? Connect China's completely landlocked western Xinjiang region straight down to the Arabian Sea via Pakistan. It started as a $46 billion promise and eventually ballooned to nearly $87 billion in planned infrastructure, energy, and transit projects. And right at the southern tip of this massive corridor is our focus for today, Gwadar Port.
Moving right into Section 2. Gwadar's geographic significance, bypassing choke points.
To really grasp why billions of dollars are pouring into this specific spot, you just have to look at the map. Gwadar sits a mere 400 kilometers east of the Strait of Hormuz. Why does that matter? Well, about 40% of China's imported oil transits right through that strait. For Beijing, Gwadar is basically a massive insurance policy against the Malacca dilemma. You know, the strategic fear that rival navies could blockade the Strait of Malacca. By carving out a land route from Gwadar straight up into China, they completely bypass that maritime risk. But here's the catch. This puts a potential Chinese presence directly on India's western flank. And India is definitely not just sitting around, they're actively responding to this security concern by helping build the Chabahar port right next door in Iran as a strategic counterroute.
Section 3. The local ground reality, promises versus experience.
Now we get into the discussion of what's actually happening to the people living there. There is this incredibly stark contrast between the glossy investment expos and the daily lives of the local Baloch population. The national narrative projects this booming, modern coastal megacity with job creation and value-added product chains. But the reality on the ground? It's a completely different story. The local Baloch population is dealing with intense exclusionary development. We're talking about widespread displacement, heavy security fences literally dividing up their city, and a shocking lack of basic necessities. Imagine not having clean drinking water or reliable electricity, while right next door sits a high-tech, Chinese-operated port facility. Let's anchor this in some hard numbers to really put it into perspective. Back in 2018, there were 850 Chinese skilled laborers working inside the Gwadar Free Zone. Compare that to just 250 Pakistani skilled laborers in that exact same zone. I mean, you can totally see why this disparity fuels deep local resentment. The locals are basically being shut out of their own economic boom, forced to compete with imported labor for jobs literally in their own backyard. And the traditional economy is taking a massive hit too. The local Baloch fishermen, who have historically been the absolute backbone of Gwadar's economy, are facing severe challenges. Things like the construction of the East Bay Expressway displaced hundreds of them. On top of that, tight security fencing around the port physically restricts their historic access to the sea. So they're forced into exploitative terms for their catches, their occupational choices are dwindling, and as a result, many are locked into a devastating cycle of debt dependence. The region's resources are absolutely being extracted, but the local economic development, it's pretty much non-existent for the people actually living there. Section 4. Security threats and resistance, a hardened footprint. So as you might guess, all this economic friction hasn't just happened in a vacuum. It has fueled immense local anger and massive security challenges. To protect these commercial operations from local pushback, Pakistan has heavily militarized the area. We're talking about deploying a special security division with 15,500 troops, plus a dedicated Naval Task Force 88 just to protect the sea lanes. And remember those fences? Gwadar City itself is surrounded by heavy security fencing. But here's the paradox. This massive, heavy-handed security presence only makes the local population feel even more alienated. and that directly correlates with a rising number of militant attacks on Chinese workers and CPEC infrastructure by Baloch sub-nationalist groups. Which brings us to our final point, Section 5, a future naval base, from commerce to defense. If we zoom back out to the macro geopolitical level, something really stands out. Commercial shipping at Gwadar has been shockingly low. Like between 2013 and 2017, the port handled only 60 ships. That's practically nothing for a major global port. This conspicuous lack of commercial activity leads defense analysts to strongly suspect its true primary purpose isn't actually economic. Open-source satellite imagery has picked up Chinese complexes in Gwadar with unusually high security perimeters. Experts believe this lack of economic disruption is actually a feature, not a bug. It provides the perfect cover for China's People's Liberation Army Navy to covertly militarize the facilities, basically preparing a dual-use blueprint. Military journals, and frankly, this includes some published by the Pakistan military itself, lay out 4 very specific strategic rationales for why China would want to transform this port into a forward-operating naval base. First, it secures that overland energy route we talked about earlier. Second, it could literally bottle up the Indian and U.S. navies in the Arabian Sea, totally restricting their maneuvering space. Third, it helps Beijing sustain a dominant presence in the Indian Ocean. And fourth, it provides a highly strategic, forward-listening post for gathering intelligence. This quote from a U.S. Institute of Peace analysis really hits the nail on the head. China does not yet know what it wants, but is establishing a presence as a form of contingency planning. Beijing is playing a highly opportunistic, very patient long game here. They might not have a formal naval base right this exact second, but they are laying down the infrastructure, securing the pier space, and establishing a physical presence for high-end contingencies. They're letting Pakistan deal with all the local friction on the ground, while they quietly lay the groundwork for a massive geopolitical advantage. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a massive, absolutely crucial question. Will Gwadar actually realize its grand promise as a prosperous trade hub, or is it ultimately destined to become a heavily fortified naval outpost serving strategic military interests? Whatever the outcome, it is going to profoundly reshape the global geopolitical map. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you in the next explainer.